Yo, what's shaking, everybody? Welcome to an Overreaction Monday show here in the House Divided time slot. I'm Jeff Ketchum, no Chad Hastings this week. He's on vacation. Let him have, I think he's on a boat floating somewhere right now. Let's hope he's having a good time on international waters. No Anwar Richardson this week. No Alex Dunlap this week. Feels like I don't think there's any Travis Gailey this week. It's a whole lot of me and Jason Sukamel, and we will be with you later today in the recruiting hour here on Orange Bloods Live. By the way, do me a solid. Hit the thumbs up button, subscribe to the channel, get notifications, all of those things. And by all means, comment away. Jump into the Specs chat. Communicate with me. Today's a good day to be interactive. I will make sure that we are interactive today. I see Michael Simpson already jumping into the Specs chat. I've been telling the bedwetters for 2 years to truck Sark and to let him flip guys in December, but this feels different. We are taking shots from all sides. Sharma, Zion, Brew, uphill battle. Michael, we're going to talk some recruiting. Don't you dare worry about that. We're going to jump into everything. And, you know, my general tone on all of this will be, it's no time to panic. But there's a really interesting conversation to be having right now about Texas football recruiting, where it sits with a number of its big targets. We will do some of that today. And if you want to send a super chat and just skip to the right to the front of the line, like that's how we roll. So feel free to do that as well. Texas is in the SEC. It's official. Yay! I'm almost glad that Texas is in the SEC now officially, so that we can stop talking about Texas going to the SEC. Now it's just in the SEC. Texas is an SEC school. We don't have to worry about pit bull conversations or concerts. By the way, sounds like they had quite the party last night. I saw an estimation of 1 million people, and that sounds so absurd to me that I'm just going to disbelieve it. But I know the fire marshals were called. There may have been too many people in the six-pack. There were a lot of things going on last night as Texas celebrated its way into the SEC. But in my mind, Texas has been in the SEC, at least in football, for the last, 7 months. I mean, as soon as the Big 12 championship game was played and Texas beat Oklahoma State, I have not cared about the Big 12. I've not paid attention to the Big 12's recruiting. My head is in the SEC, and now, exactly right, Sandman. SEC. The SEC party last night was a lot bigger than expected, shook ones. I wondered if the whole thing was kind of being overrated a little bit. Turns out not so much. The people of Austin wanted to have a big party. The people in Austin did have a big party. Felt like some of the Texas representatives who were on the SEC network last night might have had a beverage or two along the way. Good for them. They deserve to have a cold one, if you will, along the way. Speaking of cold ones, shout out again to our friend Specs, and shout out to Rogue Shop, the sponsor of the Overreaction Monday show. I didn't mention it right at the top. Shame on me, probably because my head is in a million different places, and the least of which, the reason why we ran a couple of minutes late, I had to shave. I was looking homeless, and apparently it's illegal to be homeless these days. So I needed to make sure that, I didn't get arrested or anything. So I shaved, and thus we were a couple of minutes old. But Rogue Shop, I didn't have it last week while I was in Florida, but I've had it this week. I've slept better. I feel better. Everything's just better. Go to rogueshop.com, whether it's for the cartridges or the salves or the gummies or any of the various products that they have that will make your pain, your anxiety, your inability to sleep well at night, like so many things can be addressed with just a little product. Go check out rogueshop.com. Go to the website and make it easy on yourself. Chat with Shar. Find out exactly what they have for your needs and problems and go from there. But they are a longtime sponsor of orangebloods.com, one of my favorite sponsors, and shout out to them. We got our first super chat of the day from Chris, $9.99. Thank you, Chris. My official apology for sending you bad barbecue. Keep up the great work. Chris, I do not accept your apology because there's nothing to apologize for. I was in Jacksonville. You have some expertise in Jacksonville. You tried to send me to a good place. I'm glad I went. Like, I got a story. I got to be honest. The fries with the sweet barbecue sauce were so good. It was worth the trip. I just wish I had, instead of an individual French fry, I bought a bucket. I didn't. I bought the ribs. Hey, maybe it was just a bad day for the ribs. Maybe it was just a bad day for the barbecue. I was full. It wasn't like I didn't eat it and then didn't have lunch that day. No, I ate, and quite frankly, got stuffed. Did I throw away 5 pounds of ribs? Yes. Otherwise, I might have just given them to my dogs, but then I would have been thinking to myself, they might shit all over the floor with so much barbecue and grease inside. So I don't know. I don't know what I would have done. But Chris, no need to apologize. I appreciate that you were looking out for me. And it was an interesting trip. I'm all about having stories to tell that are interesting. It gave me one. Chris says everybody has a Jenkins story. Of course. I got to be honest. I feel bad that I kind of put them on blast. I don't know that it will ever get back to them, but you know, I did kind of call out their barbecue, and you know, I kind of felt bad about it when it was over with. But they're the ones that sold me $20 of tough to eat ribs. Vivek says, and let's just go ahead and get the recruiting discussion started. What's going on with Smith Orogbo, the defensive end edge prospect out of Alif Hastings? He is set to announce at 2:30 today, although there was a little bit of discrepancy with that. He said 2:30, but then Jason, I have to go back and look at my notes with Sukamel in our team's channel, but I think it's 2:30, but then there was some questions about whether or not it was 3:30. It's 30. It's like 2/3:30. I think it's at 2:30. Let me tell you what. There's no reason why I shouldn't just get it right. So let me double check. Let me look at my chat with Jason. I'll double check this because he told me 2:30. He says, I see 2:30, but he told me last night 3:30. And so, I don't know. One of those. I think the thing that you need to know is that there's an excellent shot that Texas is going to walk away with a commitment from Smith Orogbo. It will be the first recruiting win for the Longhorns in July. Part of today's show in general will center around what to expect in July. I don't know that it's going to be the complete badass domination that we all thought might be possible in the month of July. But Texas should still have a very good July. It should land a number of super blue chips. Interesting. You know, On3 has Smith Orogbo listed as a super blue chip. I don't see him quite like that. I think he's a really good prospect. I think he is, you know, a 4-star edge prospect from the state of Texas who's taller than 6'4", and this kid's 6'5". Those guys typically turn out to be NFL draft prospects at around 40 to 50% clips. So, you know, he fits the profile of a guy that has a chance to have a lot of success. I think he's a little bit of a tweener. You know, I wish I'd taken pictures from his Texas visit last month and updated them into the system. Sorry, guys. I've just been juggling about 5,000 things today. But, you know, you can see that he's a guy that's going to need some time in the weight room. I think he's going to need probably a couple of seasons of development before you can expect, I think, significant impact from him. So he's a 2025 kid. Wouldn't shock me at all if you saw him redshirt. Wouldn't surprise me at all if it takes another year in the weight room for him to completely be the physical force that he'll need to be in the SEC to be in the 2 deep. The good news for the Longhorns, he's at the edge position. The Longhorns are recruiting really well at the edge position in the last few years. You think about they added Ethan Burke. You know, they went in They got Colton Vasek. They've gotten Colin Simmons. Last year, I think we're going to end up looking back at the Zena Umuzolo edition and saying that guy was underrated as a prospect. They've got him. They've got Trey Moore this season, and I think the expectations are he might be one and done, but they've got potentially a couple of seasons with Trey Moore at their disposal. So they've got Lance Jackson committed at the defensive end position for this class. So it's a position it's not like defensive tackle. It's a position they've been doing really well, and I think this kid's got a lot of upside. It might just take a couple of years to fully realize that. So as long as he's patient, as long as the Longhorn coaches are patient, as long as he doesn't show up and expect to be in the two deep within the first 15 minutes on campus and understands he needs to add some strength, he needs to just get a little bit bigger, because Rivals has him listed at 230 and the other services have him ranked at 220. And I think he's easily closer to 220 than he is 230. And there's a part of me that wonders, is he really 215? Is he 220? He's got the height. He needs to add some bulk to that frame. But I expect him to be a Longhorn in a few hours. So that's what's going on. Before he took his Texas visit, there was a sense that he may have been leaning towards Texas Tech. And as he gets ready to announce his decision later today, I think the sense is Tech is in third, and it's really a Texas-Oklahoma battle. Texas is expected to land Smith Orogbo later today. There are announcements tomorrow. There could be announcements up and down this entire week. Obviously, the Longhorns lost out on a couple of defensive tackle prospects in the last week or so, including Josiah Sharma from Friday, where, we were pretty open about the fact that it was hard to get a read on him. There was a sense that might have been Texas and Alabama, and then Oregon comes in and wins that battle. I don't know that recruitment is completely done, and you could say that about any of these recruitments. That Texas could go on and flip guys. Texas could have guys that flip later on. I mean, really and truly, I talked to somebody talked to a source of mine, a really good source on the Texas side, a couple of weeks ago. And he just said, look, wake me up in August and wake me up after August. That a lot of what's taking place in June and July, they're fireworks without a lot of substance. I think the Riley Pettijohn recruitment will be interesting to watch. We've had a lot of discussion about that. I tell you what, we'll just kind of position by position kind of work through what our expectations are for announcements, because those are coming around the corner, and we'll lay out kind of what the things are to look out for. There's really nothing. Let me get rid of Vivek there. Are we good? Do we have any other super chats? I'm talking to myself out loud. Apologize. I don't have a show partner. Wait, hold on. James asks, do I see Texas beating Oklahoma by 3 touchdowns this year? What? No. I have Texas winning that game. I think Texas is better than Oklahoma, but I don't know if I'm in the business of predicting 21-point margins of victory at this point in the offseason. So, James, no, I'm not going to go that far. By the way, are you the James Brown? And I don't mean the singer. Any chance that James Brown, the all-time great Texas quarterback, is in the house? Probably not, because that would be random, but the whole 3 touchdown thing got me thinking, as does the fact that, your name is James Brown. Michael says, Smith Orogbo meets the 6'4" sweet spot for an edge that you love to mention catch. Yes, he does. Look, height is not an insignificant thing. I was talking with Cody Carpentier on Orange Bloods, as a matter of fact. This week, a reminder, if you're not on Orange Bloods, come on, man, get on Orange Bloods. Get with it. And we were talking about the impact of Shane Rink, or Landon, excuse me. Freudian slip there. And Landon had a really good 5-star camp performance in Jacksonville this week. So much so that, I think Cody looks at Rink as a guy who's a national level prospect. I think he had him ranked 17th, maybe even a little bit higher. Cody, if you're in the chat, let me know. But he had him ranked really high. on his list of guys that were in Jacksonville. My thing with Rink is that when I look at my historical data, he fits like the definition of a tweener, where he's more of a 5 technique right now in the high school level. They actually line him at times. You'll see him line up like as a 9 at times. I mean, he is a versatile guy at the high school level where you can pretty much play him all over the field and nobody can block him. When you look at him at the college level, I don't think he's a 5. I don't know if he's athletic enough to play the 5 or big enough. And then, he's got, I think, the game to play the 3 tech, but is he going to be big enough? It's one of those questions. But as it relates to Smith Orogbo, yeah, man, anything taller than 6'4", and you're cooking with grease historically when we look at defensive linemen in the state of Texas. The thing that makes me a little bit nervous is I really like my guys to be 6'4" and above, 230 and above. Those are the guys that at the high, like traditionally make the NFL a lot. When you look at Orogbo, he has the height, but the frame needs a little bit of bulk. And he's a difficult guy. From a frame standpoint, although he has the height, he's still a little bit of a tweener. Would I like him to be a little bit more filled out, a little bit stronger? Yeah. The thing I like about Orogbo, though, is for a guy that's pretty lean right now, he's almost got the build of a panther. Sometimes I see those big, long guys with the frames that have so much room for growth. Kind of reminds me of the Pink Panther to a certain extent. I think of that cartoon character, and they've just got so much length that he's a little bit like that. But the good news is he's not short and lean. He's tall and lean, and I think there's a lot that you can do with that. I really like him as a prospect. I don't think he's elite of the elite because I don't think he's got an elite get-off. If you watch his burst off the ball and you watch Colin Simmons burst off the ball, you'll get a sense for what I mean by, okay, he's not that, but he's really athletic. And once he actually gets moving north and south, when he gets downhill, he's quite disruptive. Good with his hands. He's better at the point of attack than a lot of slender guys that you'll see because he's really good with his hands and he knows how to use his leverage, hands, athleticism. There's a lot there to work with that oftentimes you can't teach. I mean, some of these guys will spend their entire lives trying to figure out how to use leverage to their game. He's got that part down. He uses his hands tremendously. He'll get his hands on defensive linemen, and he has the ability to kind of move them where he wants. And then once he's able to move them, he then will get off of offensive linemen and again, really athletic. The thing that I don't think in his little bag of athleticism tricks, he's not the most sudden guy off the edge, but he's really athletic. And again, once he gets moving downhill, once he gets that frame going, he can move. He can move a lot. He is absolutely a disruptive force. I wouldn't call him an elite prospect, but I don't think he's far from it either. He's a national prospect, maybe not national top 50, but if somebody wanted to call him a top 100, top 150 type guy, no problems whatsoever with that type of label on him from a recruiting standpoint. Oscar, yes, it is an abstract reference. It's really not one for the kids because does anybody under the age of 40 even know what the hell a Pink Panther is anymore? But if you can remember those old cartoons, how long and lean the Pink Panther is, you'll never be able to take it out of your head now. Anytime you see a guy who's like 6'5", 220-ish, you'll go, oh, he's got a little bit of that Pink Panther in him. Exactly. Almost like a basketball player frame that hasn't fully been developed, like a basketball tweener, if you will. John Taylor asks in the chat, is Rink going to be an Aggie? John, yes, he is. He's an Aggie. His old man may have been a Longhorn, but Rink's going to be an Aggie. And I don't know that I see that changing. He seems really locked into his decision at this point. I kind of like this. It's not really a hot take. It's just a take. John says Lance Jackson will end up being an All-American D tackle at Texas when he gets in the weight program. I don't know that I disagree. I don't know that I disagree. And it is kind of an elephant in the room when it comes to talking about defensive tackle recruiting with Texas this year. Right now, they've got Brandon Brown and everybody, and then they're kind of waiting to add to that stockpile, and it's made a lot of people nervous. But Lance Jackson is just a mammoth human being as a young athlete. And once he adds, 30 more pounds, he does feel like a guy who's more interior in the defensive line than anything else. And I think he's a 5-star athlete for me. But if I had to rank him, I would call him a strong side defensive end, knowing that those profiles, 5-star strong side defensive ends, those profiles often turn out to be defensive tackles in the long term. And I've mentioned this on a number of shows in the last month or so. I looked up the top 8 vote-getting defensive tackles for the all-pro teams this year in the NFL. And of the top 8, 2 of those 8 were 5-star strong side defensive end prospects coming out of high school. So they were 5 stars, but they weren't viewed as defensive tackles at the time of their recruitment. They kind of grew into those spots. Lance Jackson absolutely fits the profile of a guy that could absolutely grow into an interior defensive lineman. And if we already had him labeled as a defensive tackle instead of a strong side defensive end or an athlete, or some people even like him as a tight end, I think we'd be talking about this defensive tackle class. Well, suddenly we'd be saying, hey, he's the first super blue chip defensive tackle prospect that Texas has signed or had committed since Malcolm Brown in 2012, 2013. It's been a while now. It's been more than a decade. I can tell you that. I can't remember Malcolm Brown. Had to have been in 2012, I think. 2012, Malcolm Brown, 2012. The thing that confuses me is that there was also the Malcolm Brown in 2011. So 2 5-star Malcolm Browns for Texas in back-to-back seasons. And I sometimes get those years completely messed up. I don't see any other super chats. Oh, I do. I take that back. Nate's Take jumps in and says, appearance. Oh, appreciate. God, we're doing that thing where apparently I can't read anymore because I'm going blind. Appreciate you are not being a propaganda site like Texags. I'm not. It's Monday. I don't want to start throwing grenades at other sites. I do appreciate, though, the fact that you appreciate me for not being a propaganda site. A long time ago, I got in trouble with Mac Brown. I reported on a Jordan Shipley injury, and I kind of did it a bad way in that I called George Walker, who at the time was a freshman wide receiver. And I was just trying to find out. I wasn't trying to get, hey, can you tell me, did he tear his ACL? Like, it wasn't anything like that. But there were rumors of an injury. We didn't have practice access. It was almost like a bank run. Like, people were running in the streets, crazy. And I was just trying to find out, is this even something that I need to be looking up or not? So I called up George Walker, and it just so happens George should have sent me the voicemail. George answered the phone, and I was like, hey, George, did anything go on with Jordan Shipley today at practice? And he gave me this answer that made it very clear. Oh, crap, he's standing next to somebody. Turns out it was a coach. Turns out he dined me out to the coach. No offense to George. Or George, if you're out there, I don't blame you. Like, you're 18 and the coach asks who you're talking to. You probably gave an answer. So Matt calls me up. They set up a meeting before practice. Again, this was 2004. So we're roughly at the 20-year anniversary of this situation unfolding. And Mac Brown meets me in the parking lot of LBJ. And he says, Catch, I will give you. He basically says he'll give me information to anything that I ever want regarding the program through him. I'll be his guy. But I had to basically be his mouthpiece. And I wouldn't do it 20 years ago. I told him to his face, that is not what I'm about. You know, I was still young. Things like journalistic integrity were really high. They still are, but they were really high at the list of like, I've got to maintain integrity. I told Mac, Mac's exact words were, he wanted me to be the James Hill of the Texas football program. And I found that really insulting. And I told Mac no, and then he never offered it again. But I do appreciate the fact that you appreciate that about me, Nate. I will forever try to follow that code and tell you what I think is the truth. I'm wrong all the time, right? But I'll never try to mislead you on purpose into giving you a company line. You know, there are already people in this industry that think Texas is going to get everybody, that thinks Texas can do no wrong, that quite frankly work as mouthpieces for Texas. You don't need that from me. I'll always be that guy who's not the mouthpiece all the way until I'm no longer in this industry. And that's just the way it'll be. Michael says, and as a segue into the discussion, did you see that Riley Pettijohn is announcing this Saturday, July 6th, per Hayes Fawcett? Feelings on his recruitment at this moment. All right, Michael, let's get into it. This is one of these where I'm going to tell you not to panic, but you should be aware. Like, you know, don't put your head in the sand, but don't panic if such a thing. Ben, yes, we were this close to being Tex Bloods or Mac Bloods, as fate would have it. Tim, just so you know, James Hill I think he still covers Oklahoma football. He may not anymore. It's been a long time. He was one of the early internet guys that covered Oklahoma football. Look him up. He had some legal issues about 20 years ago that made it kind of insulting that Mac wanted me to be just like him because, well, he spent some time in the clink for not so good things. And so like, I just didn't want that association in general, but like, it was a long time ago. I can't remember the details. Don't want to get sued. So yeah, Riley Pettijohn, the expectations were that he was probably going to announce at some point this week. So not a shock that he's put out an announcement that he's going to announce on July 6th. So 5 days away. Adam Gorney from Rivals.com put in a USC prediction a couple of days ago, maybe yesterday. The days kind of run together. I think the sense, Riley Pettijohn was pretty open in Jacksonville last week that his top two were Ohio State and USC. And those were the two on a coin toss. Now, he admitted that Texas was behind those two schools, but they were really close. I think, if I remember correctly, those two were kind of labeled with 10s on a 1 to 10 scale. USC and Ohio State were thought to be 10s. Texas was a 9. Not my words, his words. And so, you know, that ground can be made up. But I think the feeling at this exact moment, unless he's just trying to lead us all in a direction, he's leading us astray so that on Saturday he can have a suspenseful announcement. I mean, that's possible. It doesn't happen as much as you think it does, right? Where guys are just, because the thing is, he has relationships with the media guys that cover him that stretch 2-3 years. It's possible that he could be going out of his way to tell people that he has good relationships with the wrong thing, all in the name of having suspense on Saturday. That's not usually the way it works, though. Usually these guys, especially behind the scenes, will kind of give you indications of the way things are leaning. I think Texas was the favorite for Riley Pettijohn going into the month of June. I think Texas is probably a close third. They've lost some positioning. And with his announcement less than a week away, what would be the word? My expectations are that And I'll be honest. So Adam Gorney said USC in a prediction this weekend. I don't know about that. Maybe. I know that he talked about USC and Ohio State in the same vein. And I'm so focused on, well, where does Texas sit in all of that? I didn't try to dig a whole lot. Well, between those two? If one had to be 10, if they're both 10 and one had to be an 11, which would it be? I don't think Adam Gorney just made that up out of thin air. I think if Adam Gorney makes a USC prediction, there's something has indicated to him that USC is the favorite in that choice. I'll try to get more on that as the week goes along. But my feeling at this moment is it probably won't be Texas. But I don't think that recruitment is over. I think that it's July. We've seen Steve Sarkisian flip guys. Just a couple of years ago, it was Anthony Hill. Anthony Hill commits to Texas A&M in the summer. Texas doesn't give up. I go back to Colin Simmons a year ago. When he announced for Texas in early August, my sources were telling me they didn't really care where he announced, that what would end up mattering is what he thought in November and December. So it's kind of the thing that I suppose you would say when the school you cover loses a guy, you kick the can down the road and say, no, it doesn't matter right now. What matters is November and December, so don't sweat it out. I know how it sounds. So, like self-awareness is important. But it is something that I said about Colin Simmons a year ago when I was predicting Texas to get Colin Simmons. And if you look back the year before that and think about Anthony Hill, it was true then too. And I think back to when Colton Vasek committed to Oklahoma, almost the day after he committed, there was already buyer's remorse, and there was a sense that he was going to end up at Texas in the long run. I'm not telling you that Riley Pettijohn is going to end up at Texas in the long run. I'm telling you that it's within the realm of possibilities. So while he'll announce on July 6th, and I don't think it's going to be Texas at this moment. And look, we'll talk about it all week, and maybe we'll get to the point on Friday where I suddenly feel different, and now it'll be like, well, you wasted a lot of breath back on Monday when you were talking all that whatever. All I can do is tell you what I know at this moment and what the circumstances are behind my thoughts at the moment. And that's kind of where we sit with Riley Pettijohn. There's no way to get around the fact that it seems like Texas has lost its stranglehold on this recruitment. And maybe he never had a stranglehold. I mean, maybe it was always closer than we thought. And the industry just kind of worked it in their heads. Oh, this kid's going to go to Texas. And Riley Pettijohn and his father have always done a really good job of saying, look, we're open. We're more open than anyone wants to believe. Coming out of the Texas visit, he said that exact same thing. He never got carried away, never described his visit as like, oh my God, it was orgasmic. Best visit ever. It wasn't quite like that. And people were, he's sandbagging because he wants to have a little bit of mystery in his decision. And that is always possible. But it was really curious that last week, when kind of pushed a little bit like, hey, what's what? That Texas was behind Ohio State and USC in in every conversation that he had. So stay tuned. We'll see. Longhorns have some work to do with Riley Pettijohn, though, ultimately, when it's all said and done. What's interesting about that is that it was a week ago today. I think this is interesting. A week ago today, it's like, I think this is interesting. Maybe none of you will. But about a week ago, one of our Orange Bloods writers had talked to a source, a really good source. Not impeccable, but a good source. And he mentioned that in his estimation, the Longhorns were in better shape with California linebacker Madden Faramo than they were with Riley Pettijohn. And that, if push came to shove, he thought that they would get the California kid before they would get Pettijohn. And at the time, it was kind of was like, well, they'll get one, but they may not get the other. And I thought, well, that's a little crazy. They're both super blue chip. So you could make the case that the kid from California is a better overall prospect than Pettijohn. I mean, I think they're both elite. So we're splitting hairs and trying to make one 1A and one 1B, but they're not physically the same guy. Faremo is 35 pounds heavier than Pettijohn. He's a big kid, maybe 25, 35 pounds. He's a big kid. He's more defensive end than he is future middle linebacker. So I don't even view them as, they're both pieces of fruit, but one's an apple and one's an orange. And, trying to decide which is the better piece of fruit really comes down to subjectiveness at that point, because they're not the same thing. It's not like looking at a wide receiver and saying, okay, well, they're both going to play the X position. Well, who do you think is the better player? It's not quite the same thing. They're fruit, but they're different types of fruit. But I will say, the first I really heard that Texas with Pettijohn could be a lot better was about a week ago today. And then either later on Monday, no, it had to have been Tuesday. The next day, Pettijohn, in his own words, kind of backed that up by saying that the Longhorns were behind the Buckeyes and the Trojans. So, I wish I had better news to report on Riley Pettijohn than that, but that's the news that I have to report. Jay Lee wants to switch the conversation over to Michael Fasusi, saying that Fasusi's best friend committed to Oklahoma. Pettijohn is a question mark. And then if we missed on DK Moore, wouldn't that be a disaster? I mean, disaster. On the surface, it wouldn't be good. Maybe we're quibbling on whether or not we would call it a disaster or something really, really, really bad. For in-state recruiting, that would be borderline disaster, because those are three super blue chips that certainly a month ago have been like, Texas is getting those guys. I still think Texas is the favorite for Fasusi. I still think Texas is the favorite for DeCorian Moore, but Oklahoma has some things going for it in the Fasusi side of the recruitment, and they aren't to be completely underestimated. With DeCorian Moore, what's interesting is that Sam Spiegelman from Rivals came out today and said, looks like Texas and Oregon are the top two. And Texas is still the betting favorite, but don't completely dismiss Oregon. And I think what's fascinating about, and look, real quick, before I get into the DeCorian Moore thing, the only reason why I wouldn't completely say it's a disaster is because they may have a linebacker replacement from the state of California for Pettijohn. And it's possible that, what if Moore went to Oregon, but then they got French? If Jamie French came along and that's not a disaster. That's a reason for a parade for most programs. So it would be something short. The thing is, it would be a disaster for in-state recruiting, but you might be replacing almost like for like with prospects from the state of California and the state of Florida. So with Fasusi, I think for offensive line recruiting, that would be a disaster. This offensive line class, for my money, isn't good enough if they don't add a Michael Fasusi to it. You can't have a 4, 5, 6-man offensive line class and none of them be elite prospects. Although I like John Mills and and I like Jack. I like their offensive line commitments. I just don't think any of them are elite. Texas is recruiting at a level where elite's the goal. And if you don't sign elite, then you really haven't done a good enough job. We have to be honest at that. Elite is the bar at quarterback. Elite is the bar at wide receiver. Elite is the bar at running back. Elite is the bar everywhere. This is a Texas football program that has, and I'll talk more about this during the course of the week. I didn't really want to get into it today. But Texas has the fourth most prospects in the country who are consensus super blue chips, meaning they were named by 2 or more of the 4 major recruiting services as super blue chips. Texas has the 4th most of anybody in the country. They are playing, they're swimming with the sharks, and they are a shark. So, there are layers to this, but as it relates to in-state recruiting, to walk away with none of those three would be, it's at least borderline disaster. From 30,000 feet up, I can spin it in a way where, they replaced one guy with another guy from the state of Florida. And look, they didn't get more, but they got Jamie French if they were to get Jamie French. So, who you going to believe? Me or your lying eyes is how it feels. But stay tuned. I'm not quite ready to go that far with any of those three just yet. I still think Texas is the betting favorite for Fasusi and DeCorian Moore. But the teams that Texas is competing against, like they're not shooting from the layup line. Oklahoma has given Fasusi something to think about. Oregon has given DeCorian Moore something to think about. I'm not yelling fire in a crowded theater, but I am telling you, is the likelihood that those guys are 90+% going to Texas? That feels a little strong. And I'll point out, we reported this in the War Room a couple of weeks ago, that at the Elite 11 camp 2 weeks ago, there were Texas sources who were saying they felt better about Jamie French and Khalik Lockett more than they did about DeCorian Moore. Now, that doesn't mean that they didn't think Texas was going to get DeCorian Moore. That doesn't mean that they were in panic mode with DeCorian Moore. But with no confirmation bias, just their gut instincts, they felt better about those other two guys than they did about DeCorian Moore. We reported that. I did in the War Room. Now, again, I still have my future cast on Texas. Don't panic. Don't freak out. But I don't go around using the word lock either. And the thing that we know about with Oregon, and I'm going to spend some time talking about this later in the week as well. It feels like a discussion that was bigger than what we're having today about this very thing. Look, we're almost 45 minutes into the conversation today, and I haven't done the Oregon thing. But Oregon as a piece of opposition for Texas. Oregon knows there's a pathway to beat Texas heads up in recruiting. They did it for Jabbar Muhammad. They did it for Jamari Caldwell. They did it this past weekend with Josiah Sharma. There's a limit to where Texas will go in NIL. And Texas's limit is almost higher than anybody else in the country in NIL. But it is not, by the way, Flintstone foot job. Don't want one of those. Sure are a lot of butts. Yeah, my man. Welcome to my world. Welcome to the world of nuance, where there are a whole lot of butts. We've seen Oregon in head-to-head competitions with Texas just decide they'll spend more money. They got Jabbar Muhammad because they offered more NIL money. They got Jamari Caldwell because they offered more NIL money. They probably got Josiah Sharma this past weekend because they were willing to go to limits to places with NIL money that quite frankly, nobody else in the country is quite going to. I don't know that Oregon on the whole is spending more NIL money than Texas, but they are willing to pay players into seven figures. And Texas has kind of been in that $750,000 is about as far as we want to go. That's a ballpark. Maybe there's a guy making 800. Maybe some of the guys we talk about with $750,000 are really making 600. But if we want to just create a ballpark and say that's it, that's the ballpark they're playing in. Oregon has been willing to go into areas, spend more money to win these battles, because that is what Oregon is having to do to put itself into a position in the arms race to have the talent available in its program that nobody wants. And now I feel myself going down this road, this Oregon road. I tell you what, I'm going to save it for a different show, because I'll get lost in the weeds having this Oregon discussion, but we may have this one tomorrow. We may do a very specific Oregon show where it's really about NIL and it's really an education manual about what's going on right now. But Oregon is a concerning team. I think you'd almost rather have Texas battle it out with Ohio State for Decorian more than you would with Oregon, because I don't know what Oregon will go up to with regards to NIL, but they are more eager to go a little bit higher than Texas will. And I know Steve Sarkisian has said, well, we don't really want guys who are looking at NIL first. I think that's a bunch of BS, if I'm being completely honest. You say that when you can. When you're among the top 5 programs in the country and spending NIL money, and Texas is that. I mean, Texas has roughly between 15 and 20 million on the books for NIL committed to the football program this year. Like, it's expensive. And not many programs are spending that much money. But Oregon doesn't have the sheer volume of elite level prospects and players in their program that Texas does, which means they can spend the same amount of money as Texas theoretically is, but inside of that sum total, more money is going individually to specific players than I think you're seeing on the Texas side. And Texas is either going to adjust or they're going to lose some players. And I do not subscribe to the theory that Texas does not want players who want to go where the NIL money is the strongest. Come on. They literally signed a kid from California last year, in Brandon Baker, who said out loud, I'm going to the place that offers the most NIL dollars. Texas didn't throw that kid back. No, they just had enough NIL money to satisfy him. Jason says in the chat, September through October is when I'm looking at when it comes to these commitments, because a whole lot of things are going to change. Maybe. Jason, you're not the only one that thinks that way. Again, I talk to people very important inside the Texas football program dynamics who feel the same way. And they'll tell you they feel that way about their own commitments. Like, what matters is the way kids feel, not really September, but get to October, November. So my time frame would be a little different than yours, but October would be part of it. November is when it really matters. And when you look at when Texas has flipped kids, big time guys, the Anthony Hills of the world, that November time frame, and less October and more November, is typically when it goes down that way. Harris says Oregon has been eating in Texas for a while now, and it's concerning. I mean, I'm not going to disagree with you there. Oregon is formidable. They have the NIL money to counter Texas and then some. And sorry, I just need a quick little drink. The problem is, let's take player A. Let's just call him player A. And let's make player A a defensive tackle. Texas has been unwilling, really, to want to give a guy $1 million. But let's say they decide that they want player A to, he's too good. The kid's Aaron Donald waiting to happen. So Texas decides, we're going to pay that guy $1 million. He's going to be the first. We've raised our limits, Texas will say. We went out and did the thing that people were saying that we needed to do by any means necessary. That guy gets $1 million. Well, the problem that Texas has that Oregon doesn't yet have, and Oregon will eventually potentially have this problem, and it'll be, their number may be different, but the dynamics will still probably be the same. Texas probably, and this is just a guesstimate, but let's say Texas has 20 players, and I don't think this is crazy. This is me playing with the math a little bit, but I don't think this is too far outside the realms of what actually exists. Let's say Texas has 20 different guys on this roster that are making between, I don't know, 600 and 750,000 a year in NIL. Just for the sake of this exercise, go with it. So they got 20 guys that are making between 6 and 750. If this kid, the fear at Texas is that they've got NIL under control at the moment. And look, other than Terrence Brooks leaving, by the way, the show in the later stages has kind of turned into the show that I said I didn't want to do, but I wanted to save maybe for tomorrow. And here I am, I'm doing some of it right now. But if you were going to pay each of those, if you're going to pay that kid $1 million and you got 20 other guys making between 6 and 750, it's possible. And what I was saying is Texas hasn't been losing guys at a portal because of NIL. The only super blue chip that they've lost in the last year or two from its roster is really Terrence Brooks. I mean, I literally updated the numbers yesterday. So Texas has a super blue chip attrition rate right now of 8%, which is crazy low, crazy low. As a matter of fact, to hell with it. I'm kind of doing it a little bit right now. I'll do a better presentation on this tomorrow. I'll have graphics and everything. But let's talk about transfer rates among super blue chips. Georgia's is 16%. Alabama's is 35%. Oregon is 27%. A&M is 46%. Miami is 16%. You look at Texas, Texas is under 10%. So of the top 10 schools in the country right now in terms of super blue chips, I think the Longhorns have the lowest transfer rate of any of the top 10 schools. The only other one that I'm thinking of is maybe Clemson. Let me double check. No, Clemson's at 20. Oklahoma's at 31. LSU's at 32. So from a transfer out rate, a lot of these other schools have been losing some elite talent, 1 out of every 3, 1 out of every 4 guys. Texas is like 1 out of every 10. So they've been able to keep these guys. And you're wondering, well, who are the super blue chips, right? Well, for Texas, we're talking about, let me run them out loud. Quinn Ewers, Isaiah Bond, Trey Moore, Colin Simmons, Brandon Baker, Ryan Wingo, Kobe Black, Xavier Filsaime, Arch Manning, Jonte Cook, Anthony Hill, Cedric Baxter, Malik Muhammad, Derek Williams, Jelani McDonald, DJ Campbell, Kelvin Bates, Nato Umuzalo, Alfred Collins. You know, and the guys they've lost, Jaquindon Jackson, way back in the day, he's still active, which is why he counts in these numbers. But boy, Jaquindon Jackson was a long time ago. And Terrence Brooks, who left for playing time reasons more than NIL reasons. So Texas hasn't been losing guys. But these guys are expensive. None of these guys are like getting paid with food stamps. So that's, I mentioned 19 names, but let's say there's another one out there. So let's say they got 20 guys who are making high level money. If they were to pay a guy $1 million, every single one of those guys may say, whoa, 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 whoa. So we're paying $1 million now, huh? Well, if he's getting 7 figures, I want 7 figures. That's the new bar. All these guys know how much the other guys are making. They're looking at each other's contracts. They know. So the concern for Texas would be the moment they pay a guy 7 figures to get that defensive tackle that they covet, right? Because most of you are like, I don't care. Pay it. Well, okay. The Texas concern, or at least one of the concerns, is that it's not really a $1 million cost. Now you may have all 20 of those guys say, hey, you told us that wasn't available. If this guy who hasn't done it yet at Texas, who's either a high school prospect or a transfer, but they didn't help us get to the playoffs last year. If that guy's getting 7 figures, I want 7 figures. Kelvin Banks wants 7 figures. CJ Baxter wants 7 figures. Malik Muhammad will want 7 figures. Anthony Hill will want 7 figures. So let's say they all come in and they say, I want 250 more. Well, if that were the case, and all of those guys came in and said, we're not getting anywhere close to 7 figures, but we want to, it might cost $5 million just to adjust an extra 5, just to adjust all of the NIL deals from guys who suddenly realize there's more money to be had than they told us there was available, and we want some. So you're paying $1 million for the defensive tackle. You're paying an extra $5 million to give all of those other players money that you said you weren't going to give anybody. And then moving forward, 7 figures is the new bar. So you can see why Texas, because they've got so many players that are making a really nice chunk of change in NIL, you can see why they would be reluctant to want to go up to $1 million. When you look at Oregon, as of 6 months ago, they had half, Eddie, half. It's an Eddie Murphy Raw reference. Go look it up. They had half the number of super blue chips that Texas had. So in order for them to spend the same amount of money as Texas, they had to pay the super blue chips that they have twice the amount of money. So if both schools have $20 million that they're spending on NIL in 2024, Oregon's in a position where they have the money. They don't have as many players to divide it up amongst. So until they do, they can certainly pay the guys that they do have more money than Texas is. And, you know, if you were looking at a job and one job was in Austin and the other job was out of state, but one of the jobs paid $250,000 more a year than the other, it gives you something to think about. And I think that's part of what Texas will need to think about. Like, the price of business isn't going down. And I think someone pointed this out on Orange Bloods earlier today. I think Steve Sarkisian looked at the Alabama program. And it wasn't that long ago where Alabama was close to 40 super blue chips in their program. So they didn't have nearly double the number they have now, but it was significantly higher. I think they're around 25 right now in terms of consensus, multi-service, super blue chip rated guys. And so when Sark was there, his experience with Alabama was that those guys weren't there for NIL. And he wasn't really there during the NIL era. And I think there was a sense that, okay, well, if you get to that level and you're that dominant and you've got that much talent in the program and you're creating that many NFL players, that guys will want to come for the NFL component more so than the NIL. So guys will take less money from high school to college from an NIL standpoint because they think they'll make it up in the development that leads them to being an NFL player. That's what Alabama was trying to work with. And I think they did so fairly successfully. Not everybody in the NIL Alabama when Sark was there would have been making anywhere near this kind of money, right? And NIL didn't really even exist in 2020. But guys were getting paid. But now Sark's betting that if the program ever gets to be that successful, that NIL will matter less because guys will be willing to make concessions. And I think that's an unproven theory. I'm not saying that Sark is wrong. I'm saying that theory is unproven in this NIL age. And it will be interesting to see if Texas can get to a point where the NIL available, where guys are taking less from Texas and leaving money on the table that Oregon is offering. I mean, it will happen, and I'm sure it has happened. But we've also seen in the last year, Oregon has beaten Texas on a number of guys that Texas has wanted in their programs. Texas wanted Jabbar Muhammad, the transfer out of Washington. They wanted him. He would be their best starting defensive back right now. And that guy went to Oregon. He has family at Texas. It's closer to home. Texas was offering a bunch of money anyways. What did he do? He went to the school that offered more money. And he did the thing that Sark is hopeful that guys will eventually not do that anymore. That they'll say, well, I'll make more money by taking less. I mean, that is a very, it's quite a gamble. Not many of us take less up front for the hope, the non-guaranteed hope that in 4 or 5 years down the road, there will be more available. Again, it'll be interesting to see how this thing goes moving forward. And Money B says, yeah, Texas wanted Dorian Brew. If Oregon offered Dorian Brew $1 million, Texas is not going to break its NIL infrastructure for Dorian Brew. Now, that's no insult at Dorian Brew. It's just a reality of what exists right now. And it doesn't mean that the NIL at Texas is broken. Quite the contrary. This, I think, might look different if Texas was in Oregon's position right now. But Texas got off to such a good start with NIL and the opening stages of Steve Sarkisian's era in Austin. They've been able to build the roster up pretty quickly to the point where they have, in terms of super blue chip players, the 4th most in the country. So they're in an enviable position. But let's say instead of 20, Texas had 10. I bet Texas would be breaking that $750,000 threshold, because you could make the case that the talent they have on the roster right now is enough to compete for a championship. They trail Alabama, Ohio State, and Georgia. That's it. Ohio State has 29 consensus super blue chips. Georgia has 28. Alabama has 25. So there are 3 schools in the country that are above 25. Texas has 19. So they've got almost twice as many as Oklahoma, but they still trail those 3 big dogs. But it's still a really enviable position to be in. It's more than anybody else you can think of, including Oregon. But if, let's say, they were sitting at 9 or 10, roughly half of what they have right now, I think there would be a real thirst, like the kind of thirst that we're seeing at Oregon right now, to use it by any means necessary approach to close the deal, to get to a level where you're competitive with those other 3 schools. Texas doesn't have to be desperate, but there's a world out there where if the dynamics were just a little bit different and they were roughly half of where they were before. Michael, I'm so glad you brought this up. Hilarious that CBS just came out with the top 16 teams. When you look up the blue chip ratio on the roster, and OU is 6th and Texas is 7th. Texas will and should be the favorite. Laugh all you want, but just think, what if OU does what they blah, 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 blah. I'm so glad you brought this up, Michael. This is the 24/7 blue chip rankings, which are horseshit. Let me tell you why it's horseshit, okay? 24/7. And look, Michael, this isn't me making this up today. I have been preaching what I'm about to say for years now. Years. 24/7. And this is not, I don't hate 24/7. I mean, it's not like I got an agenda against 24/7. I just have an agenda against this horseshit blue chip ratio. 24/7 looks at its blue chip ratio and counts anybody who's a 4-star or higher. As long as you're not a 3-star or a 2-star, they will label you as a blue chip. And you count in their metrics exactly the same as a 5-star. So when they do this blue chip metric, the number 300 recruit in the country has the exact same value as the number 1 blue chip in the country. And we know that that's not the case. We know it. I don't. So look, so as it currently stands, they have Oklahoma ranked 6th in their blue chip rankings, and they have Texas 7th. But when you look at elite of the elite prospects, and again, I'm not using my data. I'm using the data created by Rivals, 24/7, On3, and ESPN. I created the super blue chip metrics, right? This is a Jeff Ketchum created thing. When you look at, and who counts as a super blue chip? It's anybody who's 6.0 or higher for Rivals. It's anybody with a grade of 95 or above for 24/7. And I actually think that's 96. I'll double check that. It's anybody at ESPN who's 85 or above, and anybody on On3 who's 96 or above. So it's not opinion. It's not my subjective take. What I did was created a rankings list of how the teams in America that have players that achieved super blue chip status for two or more times amongst the major services. So this is a system that I've created, but it's not based on my subjective opinion. I can't control how any of these services create and publish their rankings. And when you look at the elite of the elite prospects, so again, we're talking about number of guys on each roster who were ranked as a super blue chip prospect by any of the 4 major services. Texas has 19, which basically means roughly 1 out of every 4-point-something players in their program is a super blue chip. They've got 19. Oklahoma is in the top 10, but they only have 10. They have 10 total. And I'll count them out for you. Dasan McCullough, a year ago, he counted as a super blue chip transfer. David Stone and Tatum Bell in 2024. Jackson Arnold, Peyton Bowen, I can't pronounce, a Barwar. I mean, he was a super blue chip in every single service, but I can't say his name, so apologies. Sam Amosigo, again, boy, you with these names. Jaquays Pettijohn, 2022 Gentry Williams, 2021 Billy Bowman, that's it. 1 in 2021, 1 in 22, 5 in 2023, 2 last year, 1 transfer. That's 10. They have 10. Texas currently has 19 and would have had 20, but Terrence Brooks transferred. So, I mean, doesn't take a rocket scientist here, Michael. Texas is 1 player away from having twice as many consensus super blue chip players as Oklahoma. And yet, 24/7 would have you believe that Oklahoma has more blue chips. 24/7 is trying to convince you that all blue chips matter. And they don't. It's what I am not the smartest person in recruiting, but I might be the most honest, because when a regular 4-star commits, every recruiting service in the country, and that includes Rivals, they want you to believe that it's a big deal. It's not. It's not. The basic 4-star hits and has success at less 20% or below, which means they fail to become high-level players at 80% clips. Does that sound like anything that you should be excited about? Hey, great, we got a 4-star, and 1 out of 5 of those guys ends up being good. 24/7 would have you believe 70+% of Oklahoma's rosters are blue chip. Do you know what a common 4-star prospect is? It's a 3-star prospect with a good media rep. That's all it is. The difference between a high 3-star and a basic 4-star is negligible. It's not significant at all. But all of the services will treat someone who's number 250 in the country like he's a big deal, like that player should be talked about on the level of what the players I call super blue chips. And the math and the data and the history of it all says no way, no how. I think the way that I look at recruiting is on the cutting edge. I think the way that these blue chip ratios and the way that, and again, I'm picking on 24/7 here, but Rivals does it. On3 does it. ESPN does it. I'm the only person that doesn't do it. But I'm the one being honest with you. I'm the one telling, and look, for some people, it's ruined recruiting because they'll say, oh, recruiting's not as much fun anymore when you know that some 4-star kid who's top 50 in the state only makes it as an NFL player 1 out of 5 times. And I'll say, well, did I ruin it for you or did I make it realistic for you? And if you don't want realism, maybe I'm not the guy for you because I'm never going to change. I've taken the blue pill. And now that I've taken the pill for reality, I can't go back. Mike says, by the way, so Smith Orogbo is not worth it. High 3, low 4. Now, Mike, that's an interesting conversation because not everybody has them completely ranked the same. When we look at Orogbo's national rankings, and I've got them right here in front of me, Rivals doesn't have him ranked as a national prospect. ESPN has him at 102. On3 has him at number 26 overall. 24/7 has him at 171. So from a 24/7 composite, see, I'm using 24/7's composite. I know it sounds like I'm banging on 24/7, but I'm not. I'm just banging on that blue chip ratio thing. They've got him at 131 nationally. So is it not worth it? Well, Mike, on some level, nobody's going to be able to recruit just super blue chips. So you want to be able to look at positions. You want to try to find positions and I think physical profiles that maybe can offset some of the math that doesn't work for you. And I think Orogbo is a really good example because when you look at defensive linemen from the state of Texas, at the low 4-star level in the state of Texas, players at Smith Orogbo's position hit like 5 stars. As a matter of fact, give me just a sec. I'll pull it up for you. I got the graphic right in front of me. When we look at defensive ends from the state of Texas, I got it right here. 57.1% of 5 stars end up getting drafted by NFL teams. That number drops down strangely to 20% for high 4 stars. I think that's a sample size issue more than anything else. There just haven't been a whole lot of high 4-star defensive ends, and the numbers are a little offset. But when you go to mid 4-star and low 4 stars, they're hitting at those rates. Low 4 stars hit at basically a 30% clip. So it's almost at where you would think a high 4-star. Usually I think of a high 4-star is kind of one out of 3 or above. Low 4 stars, and Smith Orogbo is one of those guys. They hit at almost those levels, much higher than other positions. For instance, low 4-star defensive linemen, defensive ends from the state of Texas are almost 1 out of 3. Do you know what low 4-star quarterbacks are? 1 out of 11. They hit at 8.3%. So a low 4-star defensive end from Texas, Smith Orogbo, for example, he hits at almost 4 times the level of a low 4-star quarterback. So there's some nuance to this conversation. It's one of the reasons why I'm a much bigger fan of going through the portal than I am of taking high 3-star or low 4-star prospects if you're Texas. You know, if I'm Texas, I don't know that I'm taking more than 15 or 16-ish. I don't know that I'm taking 20 high school prospects unless they're absurd. Because in this day and age, so many of these guys, now the thing about Smith Orogbo, and Mike, we'll talk more about this in the recruiting hour. And I'm going to wrap things up here in a second, and I'll be back at 4 o'clock. The thing about Smith Orogbo, he's probably 220 pounds. Realistically, he's going to need a few years of strength and conditioning at the highest levels to get himself in a position to be on the 2 deep, to be a guy at Texas or Ohio State or Georgia or Michigan or somebody like that, or Oklahoma for that matter, that's good enough and physically ready to compete at the highest of high levels. He's going to have to be patient. It might take him 3 years. And what we've seen in the last couple of years is that prospects, by and large, aren't waiting that long. So, is Smith Orogbo not worth it? I think he's worth a flyer. He's taller than 6'4", so he hits some sweet spots that personally I think are important. But he's going to need maybe 3 years to develop. And if he's not patient and the coaches aren't patient, then he won't prove to be worth it. Because I think he's going to need a few years. And patience has been in short order in college football the last couple of years. Guys aren't waiting 3 years. They're transferring. So I think it's a nuanced conversation with Smith Orogbo, but I will say this. If he and the coaches are patient with his development and they can wait till 2027. He's in the class of 2025. If he can wait till 2027 before getting even a little bit impatient, I think he's got a chance to be an NFL level player. So I really like him. I don't love him with a capital L. I don't think he's Colin Simmons. And I don't know that he's a guy that is going to play in his first couple of seasons unless he's a freak and we see him throw on 25, 30 pounds of muscle and size without losing any of his athleticism. I will say, Mike, you could make a case that Orogbo has a profile. And On3 would disagree with me. They have him rated as a 5-star almost at number 26 in the country. So, look, I've been wrong. I'm wrong every day. I'm right every day, but I'm wrong every day too. So this could go either way. I feel like I've got a pretty strong foundation for why my opinion is that I don't view him as quite that high of a prospect. But even if you had him rated that high, he's going to need time to physically mature. So I think you could make a case at players with his profile, with his rankings profile. If you're Texas, let that kid go to TCU, Baylor, Oklahoma State, Oklahoma. Let him go elsewhere. If he makes it, and there's a 20 to 25% chance that he will, and it doesn't get really much higher than that, no matter where you rank him, unless you really think he's a 5-star. Or, maybe a high 4-star. But look, I just told you, high 4-stars from the state of Texas at his position, they've been hitting thus far at a 20% clip. You can make the case that Texas should let others take the chance on guys like that. Let them find out if he's the exception to the rule and then poach him. That's where my head is. Try to eliminate, make the math work for you, eliminate as much risk as possible, and throw your weight around and your NIL around with when something is a little bit more of a guarantee on the box. The moment Smith Orogbo is playing at a high major college football level and has become a borderline starter level player, then go get that guy. Because again, the problem with Orogbo, if there really is one, is that I think it's going to take a few years of development. And I'm a little nervous that he'll hang around that long because in this age of the portal, it seems like guys are gone after 12 months or 24 months. Very few guys are hanging around for 36 months. That's not my opinion. That's literally all of the data that we can see in, across the country through the transfer portal. Schools on an annual basis are starting to lose between 20, 25 or more players every year through the portal. It's one recruiting class in and essentially a full recruiting class out annually. It's crazy. We're on the cusp of things we've never seen before in the history of college football. And so I'm providing analysis in real time on something that's fluid. It's liquid. It is impossible to get your hands around and control it at this point. So it's all a little bit of theorizing. I think Steve Sarkisian's doing some of that as well. We'll see. Guys, let me just check. Did I miss any super chats? I did. There's a couple. Our guy JR says, I like the Texas approach. Schools, OU and Oregon, that are in the outbidding game will go through some turmoil and attrition due to their own doing. It's possible. JR, I mean, again, what did I just say? We are in the middle of something completely new. What just happened in terms of national attrition in every major conference in the country, and I did these numbers last week. Alabama's had almost 90 players leave its program since 2022. 90! It used to be you couldn't sign more than 25, which means historically, Alabama would be bringing in 75 players in a 3-year window. Well, they just lost over almost 90. How do you make that work? So this is new territory. I understand if there's disagreement. Not everybody's going to just take my word for it. But we are in a new frontier, and everybody's going to have to adjust along the way. All right, guys, look, I've been going strong for about 85 minutes. I got to wrap this bad boy up. I will be back. Before we do that, though, I would be remiss if I didn't let Lisa and the guys over at Specs just for 15 seconds.
Specs same-day delivery can save the day with our Specs app or online shopping. From world-class wines to hard-to-find spirits and craft beers to gourmet foods, delicious snacks, and spectacular sweets. It's Specs. Cheers to savings.
All right, gonna wrap this up. Again, thanks to my man Richard and Shar over at Rogue Shop. Go to the website, shop around, find something that works for you. Pain, anxiety, the inability to get a good night's sleep. There are so many reasons. As soon as I'm off this show, I'm going to enjoy a little Rogue myself. So guys, do me a solid, hit that like button. I appreciate you giving me a little bit of time during your day to talk some recruiting, and it was kind of stream of conscious YouTubing today. I'll have a more specific centric show tomorrow. We'll be back in a couple of hours, Jason Sukumo and myself, to break down what we expect to be a commitment from Smith Orogbo, and we'll get into some of this discussion that we've been having. Jason's old school. He doesn't see things exactly like I do, so we may argue a little bit with regards to the recruitment of Orogbo and what it means to the program, and we'll have full coverage over at Orange Bloods and full coverage at Orange Bloods Live.